welcome to Get a Shift On, your podcast all about career change and career transition, showing you that it really is possible to leave a career that no longer works for you and show you that other people have done it and that it really is possible. This week, I warmly welcomed Christi, who was a great friend of mine when I worked and lived in America. She discusses all about her career and how it's transitioned and changed over the years and the seasons of her life. Please do like, share and subscribe to my podcast. It just means I can help as many people as possible get out of the careers they hate and do something they love. Enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to Get a Shift On, a podcast all about career transition and career change. Today I'm really pleased to welcome a very good friend of mine, Christi. We used to work together in America when I lived there, and we traveled all over, and we spent a lot of fun times working very hard and being road warriors, as Sarah, a previous guest, said. Christi, hello, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, David. How are you?
And you call me David.
Do you want me to call you
You can
Virgie?
call me Bertie if you want. I don't mind that at all.
All right.
It's nice to have that. It's a nickname that's not used very often these days, so I'm kind of happy if that's what you want to call me.
All right, Virgie, let's do it.
And David seems really formal, so we'll go with Bertie. That's fine.
Okay.
How's the day? It's very early there compared to here. It's end of day here, early there. What's on for the day?
Just continuing to work. I'm wrapping up some time off, so I've got quite a bit to catch up on, actually.
Inbox full of emails?
Yeah, I have an inbox full of emails. We just had a virtual conference for every one of our constituents, so lots to catch up on from those.
Do you do lots of virtual work? Do you travel much these days?
I do work remotely, as you know, as we have for kind of the last 18 years. I travel about 25 to 30% right now, majority to conferences, to customer accounts, and those types of things. Yep.
So what is it that before we get to where you were, what you started, what are you doing now?
Yeah. So right now I work in kind of capacity management optimization for healthcare systems across the United States, as you said. We are not yet in any other countries, but really just helping health systems figure out how to do the most with the resources that they have and help them reimagine and rethink about their operations and how to better plan for predictive outcomes and volumes that are coming into their centers.
So obviously the healthcare system there is very different to the healthcare system here, but I think the same battles are still faced. So a lot of what you're doing, is that to save money, just to streamline, to help patients? What's the main driver behind it?
Really all of that, right? Obviously, if you improve an infusion, for example, if you improve wait times for patients, you take one source of pain out of an already difficult experience. And then on the flip side of that, you help the organization and the health system maximize the chairs that they have, the utilization, and then also, the resources, the nursing resources that they have, the pharmacy to support that patient volume. And actually that's just applicable to the rest of the health system as well. As there's a fair amount of uncertainty in healthcare funding and sources of finance in the United States at the moment, and honestly has been for a while. Like you said, it's different than some other health systems. It's important for these health systems to really look at the bottom line and invest in technologies that help them make smarter decisions with the resources that they have and the money that they're already spending. So I'm really, privileged and honored to be part of that right now, especially in these kind of trialing times.
That must be really exciting to see. And I presume that they are saving money and they are streamlining and optimizing the services that they offer. And that must be really rewarding to be part of.
It is. Like you said, it's a very complex, challenging design, the health industry in the United States, and to help in one way to help those health systems kind of combat that complexity and really the drain on the system as a whole is definitely very rewarding.
I think that's really interesting to hear, because I think we think, because we have state funded healthcare, as you know, which is very different, that we are the
Yeah.
only country or the only system where there is problems with funding. I think sometimes we look towards the states and other privately funded countries and think it's easy because there's loads of money. I know differently, having worked there, and I think you've just alluded to that as well. So I think we're facing some of the same challenges for different reasons.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's, where maybe other systems are kind of level loaded in the cost of the supplies that they have. We have health systems and conglomerates of health systems, affiliations that are trying to get the best price for the supplies that they have. And everything's a negotiation, but labor forces being kind of more expensive in one versus the other. I do think that in large part, it starts to balance out. Everybody's really facing some of the same issues. And actually, just this morning, I wrote to a colleague of mine kind of explaining, our health systems are still very fresh. They have very fresh scars from the wounds that the pandemic created. The systems that were financially healthy going into the pandemic did well, and they were able to survive with limited impact. Those that were a little less financially stable going into that had a little bit harder time. And then we've already seen the fallout for the systems that went into the pandemic with less than favorable margins and operating, budget sheets. And I think that just with the world climate and things as they're going today, it just continues to be a really fresh, like I said, fresh scar. And I think folks are really paying attention to their cash on hand and the resources that they have so that they don't overspend and don't end up in the danger zone, right? Should things shift again.
And that goes for business and personal as well. I think there's as much of a financial crisis there in the States as there is here, and cost of living is crazy, and people are just trying to do what they can to get by on a day-to-day basis and help where they can. So that's what you're doing now. When did it all start? You mentioned before we started recording a pizza place, grocery store. What was the first job?
Yeah, so everybody has kind of their first job in my small community. My first job was at a pizza place, and then I worked at a local grocery store. And then in my senior year of high school, we actually had a program. I was fortunate enough to obtain my certified nursing assistant certificate and start working in long-term care within our hometown. And that was my first foray into healthcare.
Interesting. Had you ever thought about going down that route, or was it just because the program was available and you thought, why not?
Yeah, I actually was very interested. That was kind of the plan, was to, look towards healthcare. I was really interested in science and the human body and anatomy and how everything functions. And so the plan was always to go into healthcare. Nursing became kind of the top priority job. If you wanted a secure job, that was the job to focus on. And lucky for me, it kind of interested me enough to start pursuing healthcare in that way.
Interesting how it starts sometimes. And then you ended up obviously in the corporate world. What happened with that transition? How did that happen? Was it a choice? Was it by chance?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, right after my bachelor's degree, I think I was probably one of the first professionals hired off of monster.com and their job board. I was hired to a biopharmaceutical company out in Seattle, and I worked in the drug development space for about 9 months and then moved out there fresh out of college. Loved the job, loved the team. About 9 months into it, they cut our entire department. And so then, in these times of life, you flux and move and you find a new way forward. So from there, I returned to my college town and found various roles. Honestly, I was a public health inspector for a couple of years. I just did various things. You do what you need to do to be able to pay the bills. And then ultimately, I ended up working for a couple of organizations in cancer research. And I was a clinical research coordinator for the cancer centers, helping patients understand the implications and the benefits of clinical trial participation in their care and making sure that they were taken care of, and we were advocates for everything that they needed out of part of that. And so when I was working in that role, obviously I got to know some of the commercial vendors that we would work with within the cancer center. And one of those vendors was one of your recent guests, Sarah Ariado. She worked for a company and actually recruited me into that company. And that's when I entered into the health technology side of healthcare and everything that we do.
I love the fact you mentioned Monster. And I don't know if we've ever talked about this. That is exactly how I ended up leaving clinical work to go into the corporate world. Because I'd seen
Really?
an advert stroke commercial on TV, and I thought that's a load of rubbish. Put your CV on here and get a job. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. And I did over a weekend, and someone called me on a Monday. And I remember it as clear as day because it was from a company and it sounded like it was IT based. And I thought, oh, no, I don't want to do that. And one of my seniors that I was working with said, just take the phone call, just see what it's about. And it was to go and work for the company that we worked for. But it was never on my radar, but it was all to do with Monster. So it just goes to show how that works out.
Yeah, I think, we probably used Monster as a platform around the same time. And I do think that it caused a significant amount of nerves for my support system, my parents. And it was a new way to find a job. And I think one of the things that, people, when they're thinking about their careers, to be open, right? To be open to possibilities. And certainly using the internet to find a job was not in the realm of possibilities for people from my home state of Wyoming. At the time, it sounded really far-fetched, and it sounded like kind of a crazy idea. And in the end, it's one of the things that I'm the most grateful that I took a chance on, I think, in my whole career, because you were kind of on the forefront of how to navigate career and application and exploration of the work that you could do in the world if you're open to considering those types of things.
And that's the key, the being open to doing something different and something that I think that people are not necessarily aware of at the base of healthcare. So nursing, radiography. I think you see these people come in, maybe do some training, but it's never an option. You don't ever class it as an option that that's something you could do. Certainly back then, it was never a consideration of mine, which is why when it pops up, like you were saying, you kind of think, yeah, I'm really grateful for that opportunity. And you said you worked in cancer research and getting patients on board to cancer research. How did you find that? Were they receptive to it? Were some trickier than others?
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, maybe I'll just insert that it was actually one of my absolute favorite jobs I've ever had. I think the way in which we approach educating patients about their treatment options with the institutions that I worked with, it was just another treatment option for patients to consider. And I think being the one to help educate them around their rights and their ability to still receive the standard of care, and the fact that this might be an added benefit on top of the standard of care that we know right now is the best course of action. And frankly, we wouldn't have a standard of care without others before them having done clinical research. So I think partnering with the providers to really provide that education opened the doors in a lot of ways for patients to think about alternative options that maybe they hadn't really thought about before. And the way that the education is structured is in a very digestible format, so that even with zero zip understanding of health speak, medical speak, and hopefully with the assistance of coordinators and providers and nurses and navigators sharing that information, it helped them make those decisions and really understand benefit that it potentially could bring to them in their particular situation, but also the altruistic benefit that it brought the world in terms of them being one of the statistically significant figures that we need to really understand when treatment efficacy is going to be reached or not, so that we can have better treatments for these terrible diseases.
And that's amazing, isn't it? When they can feel part of the bigger picture, like you said, that altruistic outlook to think it's hard and it might be different, it might not work, but to be part of that bigger picture. And is that why you enjoyed it so much? Was it the patience that made it so good and enjoyable for you?
Yeah, absolutely, it was the patience. And I also think that it was the lessons that it taught me. I learned that every birthday is a celebration. However you feel about aging, there are always people that don't have the ability to age to the age that you are, and to celebrate those. It taught me that sometimes disease can be a gift. I always tell people, as hard as cancer is, and I have had plenty of family members and friends with the disease and have passed with diseases in the cancer realm, it provides a gift of time to do the things and say the things that a massive heart attack tomorrow don't afford you. So when you zoom out and you take a bigger picture view at the world and the things that you're doing in your life and your career, and understanding that no matter if you're sick or not, the time we have every day is that truly that gift. It's a saying that everybody says, but a lot of people don't zoom out and really look at that and say, gosh, this job that I had for 9 months in Seattle, my first year after my undergraduate degree that I found on monster.com, was a gift, and it would shape who I am. If you don't zoom out to have that perspective, then I think you lose the view of what the point is of everything that we're doing.
Absolutely. And isn't that so key moving forward for everybody, especially with careers? And if you're stuck, feeling unhappy, that bigger picture, every birthday is a celebration. And you never know what's around the corner and how that might change.
Right.
And
Yeah. Sorry. The same is true with your career, right? Things can change on a moment's notice. Whether you work for a company, you work for somebody else, or you work for yourself, things can always change. So being ready to be resilient is a critical piece of the puzzle that I don't feel we prepare people enough for. And to understand that change is okay. I think we talked about this earlier before recording, but the person you are when you graduate with your undergraduate degree at 22 is not the full person that you are once you hit 45 and you're truly in your midlife. And the way you focus on your career and your aspirations and how hard you are willing to move and motivate yourself towards different ends can evolve. And we say to people all the time, you have to constantly evolve, you have to constantly grow and change and learn. And sure, you are who you are to your core, and maybe that's true professionally as well. But if we're not taking the time to give ourselves grace, being patient with the process, being resilient in the change, accepting the change and embracing the change, then we can't grow even in our professional lives.
100% agree. And when you look back to younger 20-something-year-old us running around, traveling like crazy, trying to climb the corporate ladder, trying to impress everybody, it is a world away from where we are now in every sense of the word. And what we think now is also so different to then. I think to be happy, to be settled, to maybe still not quite know where we want to be, but to be happy in ourselves and accept the situation that we find ourselves in.
I think there's seasons. I think there should be seasonality to so many things. I think there's seasonality to relationships. I think there's seasonality to your career. There are times where being good at a job fulfilling the duties of that job and doing what you are paid to do, and like I said, being good at that, it can be enough, right? If I had a million things going on in my personal life and one of my stable things in my life was my job, that's okay. And then there might be seasons where, you know what, I need a change, or I seek growth, I seek a career advancement, I seek something. And then I'll take the time, maybe finance, and invest in making that season of change happen. And so I think really getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and comfortable with seasonality is something that we should talk about a lot more in our career discussions. It's not always chasing the grass is greener, because it's usually not. It's just different problems, maybe different people. There are times where toxicity demand that you find a better environment for yourself, and I fully support that. And there's times where it's okay to sit in what you're in. And I think really taking a full view, again, I'm all about zooming in and zooming out. I think taking a full view of where you are in your current situation matters. And removing some of the belief that just because you stay in a job that's not your dream job, it's not a punishment, right? It's not a bad decision. If you're in a toxic environment, yeah, I support you kind of getting away from that. But I think supporting one another in those seasons starts to become even more important, especially in these times. And I think we need to have conversations more about.
Absolutely. And I think those conversations probably need to start at a younger age. It's not something I think we spoke about at school at any level, certainly not what our parents spoke about. And times are really changing and times are evolving with that. Parents, to a large degree, our generation, although it is changing, education, higher education, work, promotion, retirement, drop off. Whereas I think very much for our children, that is going to be very different. And I think we need to be having those conversations that it's okay to have a different path to the norm. It's okay to feel that. And very much what you said, to zoom out and look at the bigger picture and understand if you're happy in that season where you are now, if it's fulfilling your needs, then that's okay. And that's all right. But if it's not, then you need to find a way to work through it and understand. And I love what you said about work being the stability when everything else is going crazy. And I think a lot of people probably feel that you need to have the regular normality when the world is falling apart around you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think setting our younger generations up for dismantling this idea that your college degree or your profession define who you are. I really do think we need to change that, because if that defines who we are, I'm a biologist. That's my undergrad degree. My master's program is in healthcare administration, which is what I do now. But if I were to change and say, you know what, in the later years of my life, I need a slower pace and I become a florist and, come upon an opportunity to open my own flower shop. I've never thought about this, by the way. It sounds really fun. Then does that completely change my identity and who I am? If I've rooted myself so much in the fact that I am a biologist, or I work in healthcare, or I work in health technology, am I limiting my possibilities or my open-mindedness to considering directions that my life may otherwise take, maybe that would be better and greater for me? So I think just keeping an open mind and, like you said, having that conversation earlier is really important.
So true. I asked you, I know before we started recording, what is it that you actually do now? What is your job title? And that's only really so I can get a background and introduce you, which I failed to do anyway, given what you said, that's a really good thing, because when we have those job titles, when we're pigeonholed by the degrees that we have, as you'd be a biologist, I'd be a radiographer, and we'd never do anything else. And I think it's so important that our children learn that it isn't a job title that defines who you are. And I think that's the problem with a lot of people who are stuck, because part of their fear of leaving is that identity. If I'm not a nurse, if I'm not a doctor, what is it? Who am I? So you have to overcome, going back to what we were saying earlier, you have to go through that season and be happy and confident in yourself to be able to move forward and say, actually, it's not the job title that defines me.
Yeah, and I think I think also just feeling okay that if we go to the altruistic side of it, we all have to be doing what we're doing to make this world work. I love my garbage men. I need them to help keep our city clean. They're the number one people with boots on the ground helping keep our city clean. I need my sanitation workers at the water treatment plant to help keep our community safe from disease and bacteria in our water supply. You may not see a bigger picture and a bigger reason for your role necessarily. Sometimes I've heard nurses maybe that have transitioned into IT, right? They become a nurse informaticist, for example. Like, well, I'm not, something they say, what do you do for work? Well, I'm a nurse, but I'm not really, doing patient care. They try to excuse away the work that they've migrated into that's different from the purposeful, huge role that they initially took, and belittle their contributions to their system, to their team, to the world. And I think that's something else that we need to really start focusing on. We talked earlier about the company I'm with now. The work that we do really does matter, and it really is changing the game for how some of these health systems think about their operations. And that's exciting. That's really monumental and pivotal. And without our founder and our company and everybody that works on the day to day, all the way across our company, that, the group that helps us with all of our computer needs and our compliance officer that keeps us on the straight and narrow, it takes every single person making sure that world keeps spinning. And if you zoom out again, it takes everybody doing what they're doing, even if it's just a season for them.
And interestingly, what you're working with now, how you're working the company, you are ultimately helping patients, which if you go back to when you started in healthcare, that's what you were doing. And it's just a different way of framing how we look at it. And you're right, the guys that collect rubbish are so important to the way that we function in the world as a whole.
Gosh, we're going to get pretty deep on here, but it really is, if you don't have the dark, you don't know that you have light. If you don't have mediocrity, you don't know which employees are standing up and doing excellent job and which are barely meeting minimum and which are just like riding it out until you have to fire them. It takes every view and every perspective, and everybody's in their own season, in their own chapter with where they're at.
I love that. That's brilliant. So what season and what chapter are you in currently?
I am currently in a enjoy where I'm at season. I'm enjoying learning a new facet of healthcare. I'm learning a lot about how patients move across the health system from the emergency department through inpatient and how the discharge process all works. I'm really interested in learning and seeing how health operations and financial impacts hit, with current market trends and things that are happening. So at the moment, I am enjoying the season that I'm in. One of the things that we talked about earlier that I meant to come back to, and you brought it up, is really this idea around margin, right? Our health systems trying to provide enough financial margins for themselves to survive. But like you said, also in our personal lives, setting ourselves up with enough margin to have finances and resources and time to do all of the things that actually matter, not just our roles, is really important. And I think focusing on that margin for myself and my family is very much a priority at the moment. Some people think of that in terms of streams of business, right? And setting up different ways to have income generated aside from their work. And I think that's fantastic. And so I think, again, when you're focused on working on some other things, maybe in your personal life, and your job is going well and you're doing your part to fulfill basically your contract with your employer and deliver on that role, that's great. And then you can leave that and take care of the things you need to take care of in your life. And I think that's the season that I'm in, is making sure that throughout whatever's to come in the next 5 years, let's say, that my family and I have enough margin. And I'm just grateful right now that I have a role that I know how to do and I feel like I'm holding up my end of the bargain. And I feel fortunate to be comfortable in that without huge distractions of going here and going there and doing these other things, so that I can make sure that I've got a level ground set for me before I take another step.
Fantastic. Do you find it easy to switch off from work, to spend time with the family?
That's a terrible question, because of course the answer is no. I think any of us that were road warriors, we were groomed and beaten. No, we were really, our directive was to work all the time. I think our era, we were on the very forefront of the BlackBerry generation. I desperately want one back. We were really on the front line of, when you're traveling, you're always on, you're always working. And so now to come to the realization that that's not always healthy, we have to have separation of the work and the home life, even if you work inside of your home. It is really tough to continue to set systems in place to allow you to do that and to remind you to do that. I'm better at it than I ever have been. But I think it will just be forever a struggle for those of us that started as, there's always been road warriors, but those of us that started as road warriors with technology in hand, I think we're a special generation, because we're going to always struggle with disconnecting.
Interestingly, Sarah and I had a very similar conversation around Blackberries and constantly working across time zones, multiple time zones and multiple countries for me, because there were still people back here. And you're right, it's very hard to get out of that practice and stop and just walk away. I can do it, but my brain is always working and I have to come back to it.
Yeah.
But I think in the season in which I am in now, I'm okay with that, because I can stop when I get the kids from school. If I feel the need or the desire or the want at 7, 8 o'clock at night, I'll come back and I'll do some work. I'll bring a glass of wine, which will be a surprise to you, I know, and carry on, because that doesn't worry me. It's not a problem. I can do that, but I've had my time. I've had my family time, and that is important. I think that's, for me, that's the balance.
I think that's a really important point. And let me be clear. I don't think that the cutoff should be defined by anybody but yourself. I don't think that we should say, if you're on your phone after 5 p.m. doing work, that you're just not putting time in with your family, as you mentioned. It really does boil down to yourself and what is a healthy level for yourself. What's a healthy level for your season that you're in with your family or whatever else is going on in your life, and even your career. Listen, if I was, putting in extra hours trying to get to the next step in my career, whether that be a promotion or another degree or a certification, I would expect to have to put in more time towards that. And obviously I would have had those conversations with my family and friends. And that would be the expectation. I've seen CEOs that work best when they wake up at 3:30 or 4 a.m. and they start answering emails so they can get those first things off. But in their tagline, in their signature line, they say, I'm responding to your emails at a time that works best for me. You receiving this is not an expectation from me that I expect you to respond at 4:45 in the morning. And so I think being more clear about our intentions and about the design that my work life, if I'm a remote worker and have the opportunity to design that, what that looks like and what functions best for my circadian rhythm and all of the things. I think having more conversations around what your work life balance looks like for you and what it looks like for me and how those are different, and that I have no expectations that you match mine. I think having more of those conversations leads us all into a place where we have a better, healthier, working collaborative place than expecting people to unplug completely from 5 to 9 just because that's what works best for our family life.
And I think that has changed over the years as well. I think the expectation of our parents was probably more the classic 9 to 5. You come, you go. Now, technology has obviously changed that. And I can't imagine when we were on the road together that we could have stopped. You know, you don't just leave a clinic because it's 5 o'clock. There's still patients, there's still problems. That doesn't work. Upgrades happen out of hours. All of that good stuff. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think set those expectations. And I love that in an email signature to say this is not an expectation, because I think people do worry. And certainly from a self-employed point of view, I will work very random hours, as I've already alluded to, but also I can't always pick up emails. So actually on some of my email signatures, please bear with me, be patient. So what's next? That's the big question. What's next? If you can answer that. Or are you just happy and content?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think what's next is to determine what's next. Frankly, I think I'm in a season of feeling content and feeling satisfied and happy with where I'm at and how I'm supporting my family in this time. And we've talked about this before. I'm at an age where I now need to consider if constantly pushing and constantly driving towards something more and something new and something different, and if it's a corporate ladder, like I said, or a different degree or whatever it may be, I think I'm at a point where I have to determine the level of investment and time and money and everything that I'm willing to put into a next step. I've always been, I guess, I've always been considered younger than I actually am. And it's created some I was really excited to see my gray hairs come in so people could actually now see my true age. I'm never going to color them because I've always been kind of discredited because folks thought I was younger than I was. And so I think just coming into my midlife and thinking, what next steps could I do that make me feel comfortable that I would still have the balance that I crave and I need, and frankly that I've worked so hard for. We worked hard for a lot of years, and being able to have the luxury to assess what the next step is something I'm really excited about. And I'm not nervous about it. That's the thing, getting comfortable with the uncertainty, getting comfortable with the excitement of the unknown, and frankly, being comfortable with the waiting is the phase that I'm at.
And I don't think we can say anything fairer than that. Let's end it there. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you. I appreciate everything we've spoken about. I think it's been really, really insightful. And we will definitely have a follow up around food, mechanisms, wishisms. And I wish you all the very best in wherever it takes you. And here's to retiring and living forever in Maine. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And you.
Good to see you.